morning and welcome, everyone. So according to the IEA, 600 million people in Africa currently lack access to electricity, which obviously represents a serious obstacle to economic growth, general well-being for people on the continent. Now, Rwanda happens to be one of the African countries that's on track to attain full access to electricity by the end of this decade. And I'm really pleased this morning to be joined by my friend, President Kagame, the Republic of Rwanda, to discuss how his nation and others are balancing this idea of energy access with sustainability and decarbonization. So, President, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe we can start just by sort of a more macro picture, because I think it's important to how Africa and Rwanda in particular sets up for energy access. But rising global interest rates, the financial markets have been turbulent, questions about international financial institutions. Can you talk a little bit about how you're feeling about the state of the global economy, but more specifically within Africa and Rwanda? How are things going? How does it feel economically?
Well, thank you, Matt. I want to thank and commend Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy and yourself for inviting me to be here. On to the question, Africa has already been struggling but making good progress even before the crises that have come to be there currently. But now there is pressure on the side of energy and energy access, is food, fuel, all kinds of, and financing for every activity that is to take place on the continent. Just like in different parts of the world, there are these other struggles and problems taking place. But Africa is getting together, is putting its act together through integration. There is integration that has been taking place, integrating of markets. We have Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the biggest now in the world. On one hand, it's huge opportunities. On the other, these challenges, which in the end also translate into opportunities, especially not only for Africans, but also for others who want to invest on the continent. So after the pandemic, COVID, and then with the crisis going on in Ukraine, we are beginning to see good progress once again. Countries are turning the corner and recovering. The economies are recovering. Rwanda's, we have recovered from the crisis of COVID. Still, a few problems originating from the crisis in Ukraine.
So Rwanda has been a tremendous success story over the last 30 years, rebuilding, thriving economically, even in light of the pandemic and all the effects of COVID. What have been some of the keys to that success and that leadership in Africa and really globally? And how will those, I think, set you up for success in this energy transition?
It all requires good governance. It requires the rule of law. It requires planning in real sense. Planning will come into every aspect of our life. If you look at even the energy transition part, it requires a lot of planning. There are so many things that depend on many factors that are not under one's control. So what we do, we focus on planning and planning with others. We look at the whole, as I said earlier, the region. We plan in the region, we integrate visions, if you will, and where do we want to go? Where does each one country want to go? And in our part, we have focused on building these strong institutions, making sure that the governance aspects of it looked into carefully. And I think we are predictable. We have created a predictable environment. When you come to Rwanda, you know what to expect. We have a conversation. You can trust that what we are saying, we are talking about is what is going to happen. I think this is very key for sustainable success of any country, or even if it is just any organization. I think there has to be that sense of being trusted that what your word is going to be translated into deeds. I guess that's what every part of the partnership is expecting. So we have been served well by being stable, reliable, and then the planning that comes into it is important.
Yeah, I know. I think those are all accurate. I know in my business, partnership is essential. And then, a transparency, a rule of law, and a consistency in the application, all of which I think are super important setups for energy access. So let's switch over and let's talk about energy, because that's really the purpose of why we're here today. So we're in the midst of this massive energy transition. Trillions of dollars of capital is needed in order to effectuate it. Yet much of the African continent doesn't have access to energy today, which, along with healthcare and education, are the three things that I think can really lift up, the standard of living of a population. So when we talk about the trade-offs between energy access, energy development, and the energy transition, the introduction of renewable, clean, decarbonized energy, what does that conversation look like in Africa today? Because I know what it looks like in the US. And even in the US and Europe, I think there's an underappreciation that it is in fact a transition, that it's not linear, it's going to be bumpy. But what is it, you hear all the conversations, what's actually being talked about in Africa and in Rwanda today?
It's a sort of complicated discussion. Africa, as you said, the majority of the Africans don't have access to electricity. And it is very clear that for us to grow, to see growth, to realize middle income or high income status, without electricity access is just not possible. Anyone would be deceiving to say there is another channel. So that's number one. And the biggest part you find, they were telling me, is about 60% of Africa's population don't have access to electricity. Well, that's a big problem. But at the same time, it's a big opportunity in terms of if we made the right investments, again, based on the proper planning that has to happen, I think we can be able to create a very big market, whether it is energy market for the industry, for people investing, but also give an opportunity for this big population to keep growing. That is the conversation that goes on. And how do we transition then? You have to even put into account transitioning from what? So you're already transitioning from this very low base on electricity access, and then to just leapfrog and arrive at clean energy, as the whole talk is about across the world, which is a good thing. So first, we need energy. And then from there, we can talk about what type and how. If we can have access to green energy, definitely this would be the best, but how do you get there realistically? So that's why I think there is talk of transition, and transition from a very low base on our continent, no access to electricity, so we have to first give. And then the majority of the sources of this energy are fossil fuels. But some people don't even have access to these fossil fuels. It's a problem already. So we have to be very careful in the planning with our partners. What are we really talking about? But all these we are talking about, much as there are challenges, these are opportunities for investments. Once you have addressed all the other issues to do with investments, how they are made, what expected returns, and so on and so forth. And I want to assure you, Africa is no riskier place for investment than other parts of the world. So we have a huge challenge, big opportunities, and we just need to plan how do we progress without causing even bigger problems for ourselves. You find the discussions that are out there every day, we all need to go the way of renewable sources of energy. That's fine, that's what we all want to achieve. But how do we get there when the rest of the world is still on fossil fuels, and Africa not even having access, really, in a sense? So how do we just jump to what we want to as the best for ourselves without having to go through all these steps? It's a challenging discussion. Nonetheless, the discussion we must have and find the best way out of.
So there's a lot of places we could go with this, and I do want to come back to the financing piece and how to attract investment, but just a couple more threads on this question of how do we support energy access while at the same time trying to draw a path towards a clean energy future. I mean, the World Bank and other multilaterals have been pulling back from supporting hydrocarbon development in Africa. There's been a lot of pressure on Western oil companies to avoid developments in Africa. Yet, in the wake of the Ukrainian crisis, when Russian oil and gas was severely restricted, we saw African companies now Western companies now coming to Africa in pursuit of oil reserves. So, what is your reaction to all of those kind of mixed signals in some ways, and how do you and other leaders navigate that? How do you think about how to navigate that in light of the need for energy?
Well, it's very difficult. It's what I was actually referring to. It's a debate where there is a huge imbalance. There are people with the possibilities, with the means, with the resources that we should be looking up to make these investments that will enable us develop our own resources and move forward with the rest of the world. And then there are these challenges. Let's start from the very facts of the fact that when you look at percentage of global emissions that Africa is responsible for is very small. That's about 3%. At the same time, there are these fossil fuels that are present on our continent that have been discovered that Africans want to exploit, and without stopping them from actually in the end going the way of clean energy and green energy in the end, but having to start from somewhere, and you can't start from there without these needed, so urgently needed investments. And as you rightly put it, countries on our continent that have discovered enormous resources of this kind, oil and gas in different parts of our continent, the investments in that had slowed down or more or less come to a halt because the demand was, no, we should stop taking this route and make different investments. All of a sudden, because of these crises, now people are rushing to these countries with these resources and saying, oh, let's make the investments. So which shows that already there was a sort of double standard that was being applied in the whole debate. So in actual fact, people are going back to making these very investments they should have made in the first place, but at least as a way of starting the journey towards having clean energy sources. That debate continues everywhere. But Africa, above all, must really develop. And there's no way we're going to develop without energy, without electricity. But we still want to make it, want to look at and concentrate on the sustainability side of it. But we shall arrive there by addressing some of these challenges and these imbalances that are there in this discussion, and especially from. But on the side of Rwanda, for example, 44% of energy sources are renewable, and then you have the mix. We have other sources from peat to power. We have heavy fuels, but one is 19, another is %, another is. But at least the renewable side is much bigger, and it is increasing as we, in the energy mix, we want to keep increasing the investments and realizing the renewable energy sources as we decrease the carbon emissions that are coming from other types of sources.
So this energy transition that is in process in Africa and elsewhere is going to require a lot of capital. public capital, private capital. What are you and other countries in the continent doing to encourage capital to come in to support this transition? And are you seeing interest? Are there things that are not happening that you wish were happening as we look to finance all of this infrastructure?
Capital is being realized. You can see investments coming in, even in self-interest. Now, initially it was, don't do this because this is a way to do it. And now, as I said, because of the crisis, people are now saying, no, I think we should be interested in that. And by basing on their own interests, those who are making the investments, I think we are realizing our own interests as a continent with these natural resources that have to be exploited. So, but of course, investments will not just depend on the availability of resources alone. They also depend on the first thing I said earlier of how the governance structures so that there is reassurance, and how is the security side of it, so that people, when they come to invest on our continent, they reassured not only of the returns, but of the stability and the security that must be there. And on that, it's up to Africa to work on that side of it. Inevitably, there will be countries that have more of what is needed than others, but every day we try to work together on the continent, and so that we all are focused on the main things that are needed, and that is to create a secure environment for investments to be made.
So as we think about capital, ESG is a word that's increasingly important in really global circles: environment, social governance, investors, funds thinking about these issues. Are there key things that you in Rwanda or in other countries need to do to build up the ESG credentials to attract that capital?
Yeah, there are many things that we need to. Well, first of all, the one sure thing is that Africa is increasingly becoming a big market. And it is becoming so on the basis of the aggregation of these markets by each country as we get together. And as I said, the governance aspects of it is always going to be very critical. The transparency, the clear planning and processes that show where everyone is going and that reassures people. I think that is the most important thing.
Infrastructure is a key part of this. It's something I spend a lot of my time doing. Is there a plan within Rwanda to develop an electricity grid? How is that going? How are you coming along in the journey towards developing that electricity delivery system?
We have built electricity grid already that is in development. We have off-grid sources of energy as well, based on solar. And in fact, right now we are having discussions in another entirely new subject where some partners have brought up the idea of small modular nuclear reactors, which are going to be if you look at here, the capital costs, not much, but also safe. So there's safety, the cost being looked at. But this is a new, new idea, and we want to encourage it. In fact, we are discussing with the partners to see what we can do in Rwanda that will influence similar developments elsewhere. In fact, Africa more or less is becoming a test bed for some of these technologies. We have no legacy problems like in some other parts of the world, so that's a good advantage. So these modular nuclear reactors, from the theory of it and the discussions so far and what is being shown, might be something to urgently look at that may work for us. So that those are the discussions we are having, other than other investments we have made, like also the infrastructure in terms of the grid, but we don't rule out the off-grid provision of energy as we have already started.
So as we think about financing, as we think about infrastructure, China has been a very big investor in the region. Do you see that continuing? Has that been helpful to the overall effort to move towards greater energy access and energy transition?
It is already there. It continues to be there, and I think it will continue. China is investing in the continent. Whatever one may say about it, at least is happening. You ask for the alternative, sometimes you don't see it. So in some discussions, it has been unfair to complain about China and the investments it is making when nobody else is making the investments. I think if everyone was making the investments as they should be made and benefiting the continent, the rest would sort itself out. People would lean towards where they have more benefits than others.
So I guess another thing that's talked a lot about in this context is biodiversity and natural capital. Using biodiversity to avoid deforestation and carbon credits, carbon taxes. Is that something within Rwanda or within the greater African continent that is emerging as a continuing trend? There have been countries like Gabon who've accessed these markets. Do you see that continuing? And are there issues with it that you see?
That is happening, that is continuing. It's gaining traction, in fact, across the continent. Countries are coming together, especially in this equatorial belt region, countries that have huge forest covers are already involved in that. There are many innovative ideas that are coming up, and people are engaged in that. It's a new, I think it's not a secret that there are experts and people exploring what needs to be done, even that come from your group, Matt, yourself, which I have to thank you for. They are very active in our region, looking at how to do carbon trading and what other kinds of considerations that are now new in the market and can help in some realization of these investments, and in the end also doing away with the carbon emissions.
Another topic that's talked about a lot is Africa's mineral resource and the rare earth minerals that are often needed in applications associated with the energy transition, battery and other things. Is there a coordinated plan to how to think about that within the African Union? Is it country by country? How do you address exploitation and other issues associated with these needed resources?
There is discussion going on, but the organization part of it could be better, but it is a discussion within the African Union structures and together with the partners from across the world. I think there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of improvement to be realized. So it is work in progress, but people are already having it on their minds. Discussions are going on. A little bit still fragmented, so we want to bring that together so that we act as one continent, which is a bit difficult, but we need to do it.
I guess another topic to touch on here as we kind of move across the landscape is the COP that's upcoming in the UAE in December. There was a lot of dialogue last year about loss and damages, expectation that will be a key topic this year, really a critical milestone year relative to the Paris Accords. How are you, Rwanda, and the greater Africa thinking about this year's COP? What would you like to see accomplished, goals and objectives that you think might be important in recognition of this question that we've been talking about of access versus transition?
I think progress was made in Sharm el-Sheikh in the last COP, which took place in Egypt. Now we go to UAE. I think a lot was achieved in the area of loss and damage. The discussions were very complicated, but nonetheless, progress was made. So there is a need for consolidation of that, and there is also a need for continued understanding the responsibility of everyone, starting with individual countries and then across countries that should work together. In terms of what each country's responsibility is, in fact, like for Rwanda, around that time in Sharm el-Sheikh, we were able to mobilize quite significant amounts of money we created a fund that is going to specifically look into what needs to be done in this area of sustainability. So each country needs to look at that, and then working together, I think we need to consolidate that when we get to UAE next COP.
And similarly, I think Rwanda was elected for the presidency of IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Do you, beginning in January, do you have specific objectives that you want to accomplish at a high level in that, in consideration of that appointment?
Really, the main thing is to raise the debate, but more so the action. The ideas are already out there. We have heard so much input from the experts. Things are known what needs to be done. I think what remains mainly is the politics of it. How do we move around and find a way to get into action, to get results. I think this is the main thing for us. We want to emphasize we need to talk about things, and the right things for that matter, and based on the scientific evidence and expert advice that has already been made. But finally, it has to be reflected in the results out of the actions we must take. I think that's the aim of Rwanda on its participation, to raise that sense of urgency all the time so that people don't just, we have COP 1, 2, up to 20 something, then we are into 100, then, but you don't see the results. I think that is the issue.
So let me end with this question, which is, how do you see Rwanda's preferred path to a secure energy future, and maybe by extension much of Africa, given your leadership? But regardless of how the West might think about it, or how they might guide Africa towards this transition, how are you thinking about it at a high level? What would you like the audience to take away?
Well, it's more or less what I have just talked about. I think there is enough scientific evidence, information, real data that we need to base on to do certain things. What we cannot get the desired results if we just keep in debates and then divided. So why don't we put together all we have come to understand that should be working for us and make it work, and cut short the continued debates of, who should do what, why do, and make sure that we bring some level of harmony and understanding, that what one needs is what the other one needs as well. It's not a question of the other one carrying the burden of the other and continuing as if nothing has happened. So for me, that's the issue, even when it comes to Africa. Africa, we are talking about, is at a low base on many things, and we want to move up and do what everyone else wants for themselves. That's what Africa wants for itself. And therefore, in this debate, we cannot continue, and that's what also came up during the Sharm el-Sheikh discussions. Cannot continue to be responsible for the least carbon emissions and then continue to carry the biggest burden for that. I think something needs to happen to change that, and I think that's what I would wish the audience and the many contributors to this debate to take away from us.
I'm sure you would all agree that Africa and the African continent is essential to the future of humanity and the planet. The market development opportunities is significant. So please join me in thanking President Kagame for a wonderful conversation. And thank you.
Thank you very much.